In the depths of antiquity, as the destinies of empires were just beginning to unfold, a man was born in 356 BCE who was destined to forever alter the course of history. This was Alexander II of Macedon, better known to the world as Alexander the Great, whose name still evokes awe and admiration. He was the son of Philip II, the powerful king of Macedon, whose Argead dynasty had ruled these lands for centuries, expanding their influence and might. The future conqueror's mother was Olympias, daughter of King Neoptolemus I of Epirus, a woman not only of royal blood but also, according to tradition, possessing a strong character and a mystical connection to ancient cults. However, Alexander's true greatness was believed to stem not only from his earthly lineage. According to legend, King Philip II's royal family traced its descent from the Heraclidae, direct descendants of Heracles, the most famous ancient Greek hero, a demigod whose incredible feats became an epitome of strength, courage, and an indomitable spirit. This heritage bestowed upon the Macedonian kings an aura of divinity. And this was only part of his remarkable ancestry. Olympias of Epirus' family also boasted a mythological ancestor, tracing their origin to another ancient Greek demigod, Achilles, the hero of the Trojan War, whose valor on the battlefield was unparalleled, and whose name became synonymous with invincibility. Thus, in Alexander the Great's veins flowed the blood of two of the greatest heroes of ancient myths, foreshadowing a destiny that transcended any human imagination. From early childhood, these legends were deeply ingrained in his mind. He did not merely hear stories of his origin, he genuinely believed he was a direct descendant of gods and mythical heroes of antiquity. This unwavering belief in his divine purpose became the cornerstone of his personality, shaping ambitions that would shape the entire known world and forever change its geographical and political map. What would happen when a man convinced of his divine mission took up the sword and led armies? Let us mentally transport ourselves to the mid-4th century BCE. In those times, Macedon, with its capital city of Pella, was a relatively small Greek kingdom located at the northeastern tip of the Balkan peninsula. While the future great commander Alexander was learning the rudiments of knowledge under the tutelage of the eminent philosopher Aristotle and taming the spirited horse named Bucephalus, his father, Philip II, was already actively pursuing his Macedonian conquests. He succeeded in ending the Chalcidian League and defeated the Phocians and their allies during the Third Sacred War. Philip II also implemented extensive reforms in the Macedonian army, transforming cavalry into the primary striking force of his troops and creating the famous Macedonian phalanx. The main distinction of this phalanx from the classical Greek one was the use of the elongated 6-meter pike, the sarissa. Subsequently, after Alexander the Great's grand conquests, the Macedonian phalanx would spread throughout the eastern Mediterranean, becoming a standard battle formation until it was definitively defeated by Roman legions during the Macedonian Wars. The 18-year-old Prince Alexander received his baptism of fire at the Battle of Kyrenia in central Greece. In this battle, his father Philip confronted a united league of Greek city-states, led by Athens and Thebes. The combined Greek army was commanded by the Athenian generals Lysicles and Chares. The main ideologue of the anti-Macedonian coalition was another Athenian, the statesman and renowned orator Demosthenes. Alexander commanded the Macedonian cavalry in that battle. It was his units that delivered the decisive blow, after which Philip was able to encircle and utterly defeat the enemy. After their defeat at Kyrenia, the Athenians condemned Lysicles to death, and Philip became the hegemon of the Corinthian League, a federation of Greek city-states that the Macedonian king formed under his leadership for the future invasion of the vast Achaemenid Persian Empire. This alliance was an unprecedented historical precedent, where Greek city-states united within a single political entity. The only exception remained Sparta, which would later join this league during Alexander's reign. Shortly after these events, Pausanias, one of Philip II's bodyguards, assassinated the Macedonian ruler at the wedding of his daughter Cleopatra to Alexander I of Molasia, the king of Epirus. According to one version, the reason for this crime was jealousy, as Pausanias was a former lover of the Macedonian king. According to another version, his son Alexander and wife Olympias were involved in Philip II's murder, possibly knowing about the impending assassination or even directly ordering the regicide. However, modern researchers tend to believe that neither of these versions can be considered absolutely reliable or accurate. In any case, Pausanias was killed while attempting to escape. During his lifetime, Philip of Macedon married 7 times. Thus, Alexander had 4 sisters and 2 brothers. Despite this, he was his father's only universally recognized heir. His sisters had no claim to power, and his elder half-brother Aridaeus, according to many researchers, suffered from mental health issues. Furthermore, Aridaeus's mother was of low birth, which meant that the elder brother was not even considered a direct competitor during Alexander's lifetime. However, another young half-brother, Carinus, along with his sister Europa and mother Eurydice, was killed under mysterious circumstances. This occurred almost immediately after Philip II's death. Various accounts attribute these contract killings to Alexander himself or his mother Olympias. There is also a version that Alexander only ordered the killing of his potential rival, the younger brother Carinus, but Olympias decided to simultaneously take the lives of Europa and Eurydice. Thus, at the age of 20, Alexander ascended to the throne of Macedon and became the hegemon of the Corinthian League. He decided not to abandon his father's plans for invading the Persian Empire, but first, he had to deal with enemies on the Balkan Peninsula and secure his state's northern borders. Alexander's Balkan campaign against a number of rebellious vassals of the Macedonian kingdom took place in 335 BCE. Philip II's death provoked a wave of uprisings in several regions simultaneously, the Geti and Thracians in Bulgaria, the Illyrians in Albania, and the city-state of Thebes in Greece. All of them attempted to cast off Macedonian rule and rise against the young king. First and foremost, Alexander directed Macedonian troops towards the Balkan mountains. It was there, at the Battle of Mount Haemus, that the young king achieved his first independent victory over the Thracians. Then, the forces of the Macedonian kingdom crossed the Danube and entered the lands of the Geti tribes, who, after the first skirmish with Alexander's cavalry, retreated deep into their territory and abandoned one of their cities to the Macedonian army. Meanwhile, the Illyrian chieftain Clitus and Glaucias, ruler of the Talantii, instigated another anti-Macedonian rebellion. Their lands were not under the direct control of the Argead dynasty but were dependent on the Macedonian kingdom. The Illyrians captured the fortified city of Pelium, located near one of the main routes between Illyria and Macedon. However, the Illyrians did not manage to unite with their Talantian allies before Alexander's army arrived. The first skirmish near the city led to the Illyrians' retreat to Pelium. The Macedonians made an unsuccessful attempt to storm the city, after which they began preparing for a siege. But soon, the Talantii arrived under Glaucias's command. Alexander the Great's troops found themselves in a difficult position. They could not begin the siege with enemy armies on 2 sides, and were first forced to maneuver, after which they resorted to cunning and frightened the Talantii with a daring attack on their positions, forcing Glaucias's troops to retreat to Pelium. Macedonian forces continued to execute successful maneuvers and employ military deceptions, such as feigning retreat. In the end, they launched a surprise night attack on the combined enemy forces. This led to the complete defeat of the Illyrians and Talantii. Clitus burned Pelium to prevent the city from falling to the Macedonian king, after which he fled with Glaucias to the lands of the Talantii in modern Albania. While Alexander was fighting the Thracians and Illyrians, the Greek city-state of Thebes, which Philip had previously contended with, dared to proclaim its independence. False rumors of the Macedonian king's death during the siege of Pelium, financial aid from the Persian Empire, and the signing of a defensive alliance with the Thebans, all this emboldened the Thebans to believe in their own strength and launch a rebellion against the Macedonian kingdom. Many city-states in southern Greece supported Thebes. Alexander's forces quickly reached Boeotia, where Thebes was the largest city. After the young king's arrival in central Greece, almost the only Theban ally remaining was the city-state of Athens, where Demosthenes, a fierce opponent of Philip II and his expansion, continued his consistent anti-Macedonian activities. The Athenians supplied Thebes with weapons but did not dare to enter into open confrontation with Alexander themselves. The Spartans, known for their military achievements during the Greco-Persian and Peloponnesian Wars, whose city-state was not yet part of the Corinthian League at the time, sent their troops to the Isthmus of Corinth. However, even they avoided open conflict with the Macedonian king. Alexander offered Thebes to surrender. They were to hand over the leaders of the rebellion and release Philotas, the commander of the Macedonian garrison, who was surrounded by the Thebans in the Cadmea citadel, where he had been since the Battle of Kyrenia. The Thebans refused. Then the Macedonian king ordered an assault. Soon, his troops captured the walls, and Philotas with the Cadmea garrison broke out of the encirclement and attacked the Theban forces from the rear. Alexander ruthlessly punished Thebes for its rebellion against the Macedonian kingdom. In addition to 6,000 Thebans who died during the battle, another 30,000 city residents were sold into slavery. Their city was burned to the ground, leaving untouched only the temples, the Cadmea citadel, and the house of the ancient Greek poet Pindar, who a century and a half earlier had been a court poet to an ancestor and namesake of the young king, Alexander I of Macedon. Thebes was destroyed, and its inhabitants enslaved. After such a punitive example, mainland Greece, including Athens, once again submitted to the Macedonian kingdom. Alexander was ready to proceed with his late father's plans and begin the campaign against the Persian Empire. The king assembled an impressive army consisting of Macedonians, Greeks, Thracians, Illyrians, and mercenaries. The total strength of the ground forces was approximately 48,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry, as well as 120 ships with a crew of 38,000 men. In 334 BCE, this army crossed the Dardanelles Strait, which the Greeks at that time called the Hellespont. Soon, the first battle against the Persian army took place near the Granicus River, under the overall command of Arcides, satrap of Hellespontine Phrygia, Arzames, satrap of Cilicia, and the Greek general in Persian service, Memnon of Rhodes. The Battle of the Granicus still sparks lively debate among historians. Three ancient Greek historians, Diodorus Siculus, Plutarch, and Arrian, provide varying accounts of events in their texts. Modern researchers also hold differing views on the number of troops, the course of the battle, and the losses of the sides. According to the widespread version, the Persian Empire's army had numerical superiority and suffered significantly greater losses. After Alexander the Great's victory, a significant part of the Persian army retreated to Halicarnassus, and satrap Arcides committed suicide. 2,000 Greek mercenaries fighting on the Persian Empire's side were enslaved and sent to Macedon. The young king ordered 300 sets of Persian armor to be sent to Athens as a sacrifice to the city's patron, Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. He also ordered an inscription to be sent, indicating the absence of Spartans in the combined Greek army. Alexander, son of Philip, and all the Greeks except the Lacedaemonians, offer this sacrifice from the spoils taken from the barbarians inhabiting Asia. Next, Alexander's forces occupied the city of Sardis, the former capital of the Lydian state and the center of the Persian satrapy named Sardis. This was followed by the siege of Miletus. The Macedonian king's fleet of 160 ships organized a naval blockade and occupied the ports of the once influential Greek city, which had been part of the Achaemenid Empire for half a century. The enormous Persian fleet of 400 ships never arrived in time to aid Miletus and could not engage the enemy in a naval battle. Ground forces under Alexander's command stormed the city. Due to the high financial costs of maintaining it and the realization of the Persians' significant naval superiority, the Macedonian king decided to disband his fleet. At that point, Alexander had only transport ships and a small number of Athenian triremes at his disposal. At the end of the same year, the siege of Halicarnassus began. Memnon of Rhodes and Orontobates, the usurper of the satrapy of Caria, fortified themselves in the city. Their forces managed to repel the first assault on Halicarnassus. However, on the second attempt, Macedonian troops broke into the city. During the retreat, Memnon of Rhodes ordered the city to be burned so that it would not fall to the conqueror. After another defeat at the hands of Alexander the Great, Memnon of Rhodes began a campaign against the Macedonian kingdom. He negotiated with Sparta, which was still not part of the Corinthian League. Thanks to the Persian Empire's naval superiority, he captured several Greek islands in the Aegean Sea, including most of Lesbos. Upon learning of Memnon's successes, the eloquent Demosthenes began to incite Athens to revolt against Macedonian rule and spread false rumors of Alexander's death in Asia Minor. Many researchers tend to believe that Memnon of Rhodes and his campaign could have posed the greatest danger to Alexander the Great and forced the Macedonian king to return prematurely to the Balkan peninsula. However, Memnon of Rhodes died during the siege of Mytilene, the main Greek city on the island of Lesbos. According to various historians' accounts, the cause of death could have been illness or poisoning. The latter is sometimes attributed to the Persians, who allegedly punished the Greek general for excessive ambition. His widow Barsine, daughter of the Persian general Artabazes I, who was then at the Persian court as a guarantee of her husband's loyalty, later became Alexander the Great's mistress and bore him an illegitimate son, Heracles. Alexander the Great continued to conquer Asia Minor. In 333 BCE, a legendary event occurred. Alexander arrived in Gordion, the capital of the ancient state of Phrygia, which was then part of the Persian Empire. When the Macedonian king entered the city, an oracle proclaimed an ancient prophecy, according to which anyone capable of untying the knots on the chariot in the palace of the former kings of Phrygia would become the ruler of all Asia. According to the popular version, Alexander, instead of finding a complex solution, simply cut the Gordian knot with his sword. Since then, the phrase, "to cut the Gordian knot," has become a metaphor for solving a problem with brute force. In the autumn of the same year, the first meeting between Alexander the Great and Darius III took place in southern Anatolia. This time, the Persian king personally commanded his troops. At the Battle of Issus, the Macedonian king's forces numbered approximately 40,000 warriors, most of whom were Macedonians or inhabitants of Greek city-states. Above all, Alexander relied on the Macedonian phalanx, i.e., heavy infantry, as well as the striking power of his cavalry. Ancient authors reported a huge numerical superiority of the Persian army, which allegedly outnumbered the Macedonian army by more than 6 times. Some ancient historians even wrote of a colossal 15-fold superiority. Modern researchers have more modest estimates. The logistical support of that era made armies exceeding 100,000 a rare phenomenon. Most historians tend to believe that the Persians had a numerical superiority of approximately 2 times, and their total strength did not exceed 100,000 men. Among Darius III's troops, the Greek mercenaries and the military elite of the Persian Empire, the heavy infantry whom the Greeks called immortals, particularly stood out. Alexander the Great positioned his cavalry on both flanks. He personally commanded the right, while assigning the left to Parmenion, his father's experienced general. On the right flank, the Macedonian king also placed a small number of archers. The Macedonian phalanxes and additional troops remained in the center. Meanwhile, Darius III concentrated his cavalry on the right flank, while the King of Kings himself, as he was called, along with Greek mercenaries, the Royal Horse Guard, and the Immortals, was positioned in the center. Other Persian troops, mainly infantry and archers, stood on either side of him. The armies were separated by a river. In addition, Darius III had already sent separate detachments of heavy infantry, who crossed to the Macedonian side of the river and positioned themselves opposite the cavalry under Alexander. The Persian cavalry attacked Parmenion's left flank, which had to withstand the enemy's onslaught throughout the battle. At the same time, the Macedonian phalanxes in the center advanced, but on the other side of the river, they met fierce resistance from Darius III's Greek mercenaries. Alexander then sent detachments to block the Persian heavy infantry, which posed a threat to the right flank of the Macedonian army, and he himself led the cavalry in a decisive attack between the Persian center and left flank. After a successful offensive, the Macedonian king decided to press his advantage and attack Darius III and his bodyguards directly. This forced the Persian King of Kings to flee the battlefield. However, Alexander could not pursue the enemy, as he had to help Parmenion and save his left flank from destruction. Meanwhile, the Persian troops saw Darius III's flight and began to retreat. According to modern estimates, the approximate Persian losses ranged from 20,000 to 40,000, while Alexander the Great's forces suffered between 5,000 and 7,000. Influential satraps of the Persian ruler, including Arsames, who had fought against the Macedonian king at Granicus, died in the battle. The Battle of Issus marked the end of Achaemenid hegemony in Western Asia. It was the first defeat of the Persian army under Darius III's personal command, who fled the battlefield and allowed Alexander the Great to capture his family, his mother, wife, and 2 daughters. All these women had accompanied Darius III on the campaign and now became Alexander's honorable captives. Along the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea, the Macedonian king's forces marched towards Egypt. Despite this, in 332 BCE, they were forced to begin a 7-month siege of Tyre, the largest and most important city-state of Phoenicia. Alexander the Great desired to capture Tyre because the city-state could serve as a harbor for the Persian fleet. The inhabitants of Tyre refused to surrender to the conqueror. They did not want to allow Macedonians or Persians into the city, so they denied the young king permission to pray in the temple of Tyre's patron, the Phoenician god Melkart, whom Alexander himself identified with the ancient Greek hero and his legendary ancestor Heracles. Eventually, negotiations led to the city's inhabitants killing Alexander's envoys. In those ancient times, the city of Tyre was located on an island and had walls extending to the sea. This made it impregnable. After his victory at the Battle of Issus, the Macedonian king managed to restore and even expand his navy. Phoenician city-states, such as Byblos, Arwad, and Sidon, were already part of his kingdom and provided their ships. Additionally, Alexander received aid from the king of Cyprus and the Greek city-states of Ionia. According to the widespread version, Alexander ordered Tyre to be blockaded from the sea and a causeway to be built to connect the mainland to the island. The city's inhabitants offered fierce resistance, but ultimately, after a difficult and prolonged siege, Alexander's forces managed to breach Tyre's walls, through which they stormed and quickly captured the city. Alexander destroyed half the city, many adult men were killed, and women and children were sold into slavery. At the same time, the Macedonian conqueror spared the Tyrian king Asimilcus and his family, as well as many nobles. Asimilcus remained ruler of the city, but from then on, it became part of Alexander the Great's state. That same year, Macedonian forces took Gaza, the last city before the desert separating Asia from Egypt. The city's defense was led by the eunuch Battus, who had prepared Gaza for a prolonged defense. He hoped to delay the Macedonian army for a long time, allowing Darius III to raise a new large army capable of opposing Alexander. Despite this, the Macedonian king's troops already had experience from the siege of Tyre, so after 2 months and several unsuccessful assaults, they eventually managed to capture the city. After the defeat, Battus refused to submit to the new ruler, for which he was executed. Punishment for resistance was already customary for Alexander. Many city residents were killed or sold into slavery. However, Gaza was not destroyed. The Macedonian king continued to use the city as a military fortress. In Egypt, Alexander was welcomed as a liberator. To legitimize his rule, the Macedonian king was crowned as Pharaoh of Egypt. In the Siwa oasis, a local oracle proclaimed Alexander the son of the supreme ancient Egyptian god Ammonius Ra. Already in 331 BCE, the Macedonian king and pharaoh of Egypt built Alexandria. This city would later become an important center of Hellenistic culture and serve as the capital of Egypt for centuries until the medieval Arab conquests. Alexander the Great had subdued rebellious peoples and Greek city-states in the Balkans, conquered Asia Minor, taken the impregnable Tyre, became pharaoh of Egypt, and founded Alexandria. But ahead of the great conqueror still lay the famous Battle of Gaugamela, a challenging Indian campaign, and a mysterious death that continues to spark heated debate among historians.